Good afternoon, wherever you are, and welcome to this new Learning Connects live interview, which focuses on one key topic in these days we are living in. Can work in partnership help tackling the global crisis of the learning system? Today's live, we are very pleased to say that is co-hosted by the Asian Development Bank, and you can see their logo on screen. And on this occasion, we will also present the newly launched book by the Asian Development Bank, the title of which is Powering a Learning Society. The initiative of this conversation is part of the European Trainees Foundation November communication campaign, which focuses on networks and partnerships for change. And indeed, we do believe that promoting international cooperation across countries, also by means of interinstitutional partnerships, is at the core of the ETF's action. And the continuous development of new partnerships and networks and the promotion of partnerships as a methodology is a natural evolution of fruitful collaboration and is one of our key objectives. But now let's go straight to the business and let me introduce the guests of our discussion. So thanks a lot for being with us to Clarissa Delgado, co-founder and CEO of Teach for the Philippines. Thank you for being with us, Clarissa.
Thank you for having me, Daria. Nice to be here.
And thanks a lot also to Sungsup, Director of the South Asia Human and Social Development Division and Chair of the Education Sector Group of the Asian Development Bank. Thank you, Sungsup.
Thank you, Daria, for inviting me for this very important event.
Thank you so much. And thanks a lot also to Georgios Zisimos, Head of Policy Advice at EU Programming Unit at the European Trainee Foundation.
Good morning, Daria. Thank you very much for the invitation.
Thanks a lot. And last but not least, thanks to all of you who are following from wherever you are in this whole world. Today, it's a big day for us because for the first time, we are not only streaming only on Facebook, on LinkedIn, on YouTube, but we're also live on Twitter. So hello to all of you on whatever platform you're following. And a very important thing, before starting with the questions, we would love to know where you are from, and please say hi so that we have an overview of the geographical scope of this conversation. And also, don't forget that the speakers are here to answer to your curiosities and questions, so please don't hesitate to drop a line in the chat, and we will be happy to take your input on board in the next hour. So, all right, we can go straight to the discussion. And I'd like to give the floor first to Sungsup from the Asian Development Bank, because I'd like to get started with the newly launched book, because we're all very interested to know what is a learning society and why is this concept so important. So over to you, Sungsup.
Thank you, Daria. The book title says Powering a Learning Society. The first, why powering? I've been a director for Human and Social Development ADB, have helped the team to design and implement it, some of the biggest education program projects supported by ADB in Asia. The more I expanded my work in this area, the more of the champion I have become on why education will be the most important powering agent for economic social development. That's the reason we put powering. The next, your question is, why learning society? You've been thinking about this. How can we build a learning community beyond the school walls? While the concept of learning society is not that new, current time calls for us to reimagine the education. Education is not the sole responsibility of schools and universities. This book highlights that more than ever before, the education is everyone's responsibility. The roles of school, colleges, as well as teachers and administrators keep changing as they need to become more agile toward the future society. At the same time, other actors such as civic, municipal authority, and urban planner, transport professional need to support education. Education and training are needed not just for children and youth, but also mid-career people or old people in aging society. The research by the Brookings shows the importance of space for the playful learning. And also, UNESCO has established a learning city. I will give the one example what the Brookings studies on this Philadelphia, the playful learning. They introduced the concept of so-called, how can we make a supermarket as a classroom? Supermarket can be classroom. In the front of the in the Philadelphia huge supermarket, they put signboard say in front of the milk section. First question is, where does milk come from? Second question was, what else comes from a cow? And then after that, the study observed the signboard, this simple signboard, sparks the parents and children, the child conversation by about 30%. And particularly this area in the supermarket located, this is a bit more backward area. This one really telling us importance of the building community, learning community. Supermarket, even the train, even some municipal building or hospital can be part of a learning community. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sungsup, for this inspiration. Actually, I never had a training at the supermarket, but now I would be curious to have one also, because it's indeed, for example, it would be good to know more about the food chain and a number of other aspects which are behind the food delivery, logistics, and HR strategies and marketing. So it's true, you're giving really a great inspiration, and this is part of a learning society. Before going to the next question, I'm really amazed by the number of hellos that we are receiving, and so I'd like really to welcome all our followers. And we have Salome from Georgia, we have a friend from Turkey, Alphonse from Chad, Goodness, who did not say where she's from, Gcast from Italy, Goodness from Nigeria, Kamila from Kazakhstan, Randy from Norway, Nigar from Azerbaijan, Lumni from Kosovo, Mahmoud from Egypt, and Yaroslav from Ukraine, and Khaled from Jordan. Please keep up in letting us know where you are from. It's really important for us, and it's great to know that we are all connected. Clarissa, now I'd like to bring to the conversation your angle, because it's very different, very connected to the topic, because your work focuses on teaching and learning in the Philippines, which is a country where there are many challenges as well as great projects in the area of learning. So from your perspective, from your country, what are your key messages in addressing the learning crisis? Clarissa.
Sure, Daria. So a little bit of background is that I think my perspective and the value add that it brings to this conversation is that we really work at the front lines of these learning societies by supporting public school teachers and students all across the Philippine archipelago. So we're really out there at the front, seeing both in pre-COVID times and post-COVID times how we might power together as a society to create learning for all. So I think one of the key messages I have going into this conversation is that learning is possible despite the pandemic. And the way that I and the team and I worked on this during COVID times is that we actually took the risk of partnering with ID Insight to do monitoring and evaluation of our distance learning programs during COVID, which was maybe not something that most would recommend, because it's already it's tough to do monitoring and evaluation, but this was also during an unprecedented pandemic that nobody had planned for, but we did it anyway, and they did a successful process evaluation of our literacy and numeracy programs that we run on the ground in communities across the Philippines, where perhaps alongside many of the folks in the audience, we don't have the digital infrastructure to support learning completely online. So we were doing a modular system, which means printing out modules and teachers visiting homes and working with parents. And we trained our parents. And I'm really just happy to report that at the end of the year, we've seen students in Mindanao from reading assessments that show them begin the year at 36%, they're ending the year at 98%. And we're seeing that we can still teach and do our work on the ground. It's hard, but possible. And I think that's my biggest learning during a pandemic, that where there's a will, there's a way, and we can ensure learning continuity no matter the odds in front of us.
Thank you very much, Clarissa. It's true. We can find when there's a will, there's a way, and for sure, one of the ways is sharing good practices and methodologies and ideas across the world. I'm seeing that there are a number of questions, the first questions, which are coming, and we'll take them on board later on. So please keep on sharing your comments and your ideas and your doubts, and we will take them in this conversation later on. So we've heard from the Asian Development Bank, we've heard from for the Philippines, and now we go to the European Training Foundation with my colleague Georgios, to whom I'd like to ask a question about the fact that in the EU, the role of internationalizing education is growing as a key pillar in addressing the needs of the learning society. So what does this mean in practice, and can internationalizing education help tackle the learning crisis? Georgios, over to you.
Thank you, Daria. Before I answer your question, let me show the book that Sungsup was mentioning. Is this one? Beautiful book. and a really nice contribution for every educationist, I think, because it gives different perspectives and different angles of what a learning society can be. And thank, of course, the Asian Development Bank for the opportunity that ETF colleagues, me and Manuela, have contributed to it. So to answer your question, I think it's two things. First of all, is the role of education and training, how that evolved over the decades in the EU as a portfolio, as a competence. It was not from the beginning there. Over the years, it has become more and more important. Of course, within that portfolio, the logic of skills, how those have grown, and the internationalization of education training systems, of VET systems, of human capital development, again, is something that has grown over the years. And of course, like anything that, any new approach, the first question is, why do we need internationalization? And we had those questions in the past. I believe not anymore. I think the benefits of internationalization are clear. You can see them, one, by looking at the exchanges. The one like we have today is part of that internationalization logic. Colleagues from in the other side of the world, we're on the same platform discussing about education training, and we're learning from each other. And that's fundamental when we're talking about internationalization. And of course, that has a contribution to what we call a learning society. All learning societies, meaning in smaller, let's say, in smaller groups. So this is something that has grown, and we talk a bit about that in our chapter in the book. Now, the fundamental question now is not why we need internationalization, is how internationalization contributes to the development of learning societies, and I think this is the question to address, and there is a lot of discussion, especially in the EU. You can see that the skills dimension, for example, in sectors, not just within the education training portfolio, is growing. So when we're talking about trades, for example, trade agreements, whereas in the years before, the logic of skills of education was not visible. Now it's very much visible, and it's part of that agreement, in fact. So you cannot have one without the other. And that's where we see a lot of development. And that's where, of course, internationalization comes in and contributes to this logic. internationalization is all about setting common targets as well, common goals, and that's very important because that helps the cohesion, that helps create a learning society that all of us contribute to the same goal. I think it was Sungsup who said at the beginning that education training is no longer the job of just one institution or just one, let's say, organization. It should come from different sides. The businesses can contribute to that. The higher education institutions can contribute to that. The civic society, research, policy makers, policy shapers, of course, they contribute to that. So in order to have all those, you need some sort of common direction, and the sense of common goals is important and is part of this internationalization logic. Then you need tools. You need internationalization of tools that when you use them on one side of the world make sense to the other side of the world. The logic of qualifications, for example, is fundamental there because it helps mobility. Mobility is a strong element of internationalization. So this is the how, and I think the discussion is still growing in this direction. Thank you, Daria.
Thank you very much, Georgios. Just a very quick follow-up to what you just said, because I'm curious to know actually from Clarissa if in any way with her initiatives and her projects in the Philippines, she has also benefited from international contacts, international relations, if in a way this has helped her and her projects grow during the pandemic.
Sure, Daria. I mean, I think what happened during the pandemic, so the Philippines has been been under the longest lockdown in the world, and actually interestingly, classes just opened for the first time in 2 years for face-to-face learning this week, and at that only 100 schools out of about 50,000 public schools opened for a pilot period. So we're really looking at going on 3 years without face-to-face learning. So what happened, and the reason I give this context, is because we really became a hyper-local community. We were really on our own here. But I will say, though, that the international community has always been helpful to the story of Teach for the Philippines. And to that end, we're partners of numerous networks that in an indirect way help share experiences with the team and I, which we then are able to contextualize for our teachers in the Philippines. And some examples of those networks that come to mind are, for example, I'm an Obama fellow, so we work very closely with the Obama Foundation in the US, and the access to the resources and training that they give me at a personal level is very helpful. And then also internationally, we work with the Asia Society as well as Teach for All. And so we attend the online conferences when they're available. We network with education professionals across the world, and then we bring those learnings back to the Philippines and those connections, and then contextualize it for the things we face on the ground. And so again, and I'll keep repeating this, creating a learning society is about creating multiple learning societies that then create this world where we are all striving to build this together. So a whole society approach is really necessary, which speaks to both, Sungsup's point about the importance of it, but then also Georgios' point that, no country can do it alone, even if the experience is hyper local. We can still bring international experiences to bear to help us move forward. We just need to contextualize it. And even though the Philippines is, the only country that's going on 3 years of no face-to-face learning, there are still things we can learn and push forward on the ground. And then one day, when we're done and out of the crisis, give back to the international community by sharing what it was like for us and the things we learned on the ground as well. So give and take. I hope that answers your question, Daria.
Absolutely. It's very interesting. And I think it's always enlightening to put things into perspective, because very often we are then absorbed by the discussion which arise at the national level. And these kind of conversations are exactly the opportunity through which we can understand better where we are in the world and what's the situation like in other countries. So thank you very much for following up. Since we are talking about the pandemic, I'd like to give the floor back to Sungsup, because I'd like Sungsup, you to describe, seeing from the Asian Development Bank perspective, the disruption which was brought by the COVID-19 pandemic and its influence on the future of education. How will it look like? We're talking about Clarissa and the Philippines being on remote and digital classrooms for 3 years. So we're also a bit losing our physical contact with learning. Sungsup, over to you.
Yeah, Daria, thanks for the very important question you're talking. COVID-19 is a wake-up call for all of us to realize how important it is for different actors to work together to cope with unprecedented disruption. As we discussed in the book, there is a need to bridge physical and virtual systems to improve the quality of learning. That we really realized during the COVID-19 situation. Many students now cannot go to school. There's no learning happen. The only way is that through the online virtual learning, not necessarily high tech. It can be low tech. Low tech meaning using the just mobile phone or even TV or radio, in many ways. But this is so important. This one I can summarize that way. COVID-19 really brought sharp attention to lack of access to the connectivity and device for many students, particularly in the disadvantaged community. That prevented them from participating online learning. In the rural area in India, students they don't have any access for this. So for almost 1.5 years, they don't get any, in fact, the help on learning. We are not talking about mobile. They don't have access to mobile. And then if you have mobile, there's only one mobile in family, so they have to use that one mom's mobile for like 3 or 5 minutes learning. So this become very important. And then COVID-19 really telling us we need really reformed education to help to solve societal problems like COVID-19 and climate change and food security and other. And then also realize the whole community, like cultural systems such as museum, library, art gallery, sports facility, or supermarket, they can be play a very important role in supporting education. In summary, before Corona, COVID-19, when I talk to government officers, very senior officials, they of course know importance of digital education, importance of this engaging all the society, community in education. But after Corona, when I talk to them, they want to now do something with that. That's really important now. So I would say we have opportunity to rethink, redesign education. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Sungsup. I'd like now to bring in some comments and inputs from this conversation, which are appearing in the chat. Actually, there is one question shared by Mahmoud, who is linked, Sungsup, to what you just said. Mahmoud is asking, how far can we empower developing countries to be part of any meaningful partnership in light of their lack of digital infrastructure necessary for the pandemic, necessary for learning, especially after the pandemic? Who would like to answer Mahmoud's question?
I can jump in just quickly because I think
Please,
we've had a
Clarissa.
tremendously successful partnership with the Asian Development Bank, which I think is unique and perhaps unusual. So most of the time when folks think about the ADB and the work they do in the Philippines, ADB is a tremendous help to our government across the board. But they also work with nonprofits like Teach for the Philippines, which has been a really successful partnership for us. And so one way to Mahmoud's question about how do we empower developing countries is that they, along with our other champions, understood immediately that uh, moving to a digital platform might work in our metro areas and our metro centers, but this was just really not the reality, to Mahmoud's point, for the remaining 7,100 plus islands in our archipelago. And so they were very supportive as we made the critical decision to support and continue to physically deploy our teachers despite quarantines, etc. And then listen to us and have worked not only with this book chapter. So they invited us to talk to submit a chapter in this book, right, which is normally, when I asked, I said these books are normally in the realm of academics and also advocates, folks that do advocacy work, and we work on the ground. What business do we have being part of this this book? And the ADB team, as well as the team from the book, were very, very helpful and said, no, your voice is tremendously important, and even if it speaks about a hyper local level, it's important to include your experience in the discussion, because this is how these policies get translated on the ground. And so we were given an opportunity to speak about the work we do to support the mental health of our teachers, the work that we do to involve parents, even pre-COVID, but obviously during and post-COVID will be something that we hope to continue seeing. And so for now, Mahmoud, I guess what I'll say is, I think we're meeting our country where it is while it's trying to get where it needs to go. And while there are folks planning and trying to make things happen so we arrive at a more advanced destination, we need to address the situation of now. And the situation now is that the Philippines is not, coming out at the top of any international assessment, that we're having learning loss. And so that's where the nonprofit sector, at least in my eyes, steps in, addresses the critical issue of the now, and then really appreciates it when the ETF and the ADB invites us to share our voice in these circles, and it's inclusive of those at the front lines. And so I think that heads towards meaningful partnership. I mean, obviously, then scaling this is a lot more complicated, but we're part of the conversation, and we sincerely appreciate that.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Clarissa, for having replied to Mahmoud's question, and actually linking to the point which you have just flagged, which is the importance of giving the voice also to hyper local stories, because that's precisely what can help maybe another hyper local story be inspired and exchange knowledge with you. I'd like to flag the fact that in the chat we have a number of comments which are all going towards this direction. I'll read some of them, like a LinkedIn user is asking, I would like to attend some international summits, communities to bring the best examples to my country. Do you have suggestions for online events for me to learn more about good examples, or links also you can share? And just give me 1 second to serve through. There is Alphonse, who is saying, I'm a member of a local association, and we would like to develop our village, which has full of opportunity. I'm interested to have contacts in view of small local development projects. And if I'm not mistaken, I saw another one earlier on. I would like to ask if the ETF is forecasting any free platform to team and train to prepare for various public competitions in similar sectors. We're not training for preparing for public competitions, but I'd like to ask my colleague Matteo, who's providing technical support, to share in the chat and on screen the link to Open Space. Open Space is an online community which we have developed at the ETF, but which is open to anyone who is part of the learning sector in its widest conception, like both Georgios and Sungsup were flagging earlier on. You don't need to be a teacher to be part of this community. You just need to be involved in learning at whatever level. So it's a free community. You can access that, and that is precisely the place where you can find access to resources, when you can connect with peers and similar, or also with others who might bring interesting contributions to you. And before we go back to the questions which we had discussed, I'd like also to pick on board, since we're talking about micro context, or Sungsup, you flagged in your speech earlier on also vulnerable groups having been affected by the pandemic. Khaled is saying, are there effective opportunities to create a learning society within communities that have been brought to the brink of destruction through high unemployment and increasing in vulnerable groups such as refugees? So we're bringing up the topic of vulnerable groups with the unemployed and refugees. Maybe Sungsup, would you like to add further on this point, or Georgios to follow up?
Just very quickly, what are the way we are thinking about to overcome this lockdown situation? Usually we come up with a very expensive digital infrastructure we needed, and then very expensive sophisticated software we needed, content. Once we're thinking that is no way we can really help. That's, I think, the Clarissa already mentioned. There are many different ways. I just want to say there are many different ways to really help the vulnerable and also backward community. And there are many also good practice we are already seeing, even in Philippines, maybe from Teacher of Philippines, also one example. And there are other also, excellent example we see. Within very cheap, very low tech, we can do. That become very important. When we talk to policymaker, when we talk to decision maker, they say, "Oh, it's so expensive, we cannot do it." We have to change that mindset. And then also very important thing also, Clarissa also mentioned, that mental issue. It's not just only substance teaching about mathematics and English, all those. I think it's very important to take care of family, because this COVID-19 situation put the family, very small room, about the 5 to 6 family members that have to live together. Not going to school, meaning they have to eat together. They don't. It's really serious situation we are talking about. It's not just only education alone. Education is part of life. So we have to really think this one together. That we need a holistic approach for that. So that one. We try our best to really reach out, access the support the hard to reach area and the vulnerable, and particularly girls also, girls and women particularly, they're in a very difficult situation, with a small room, and then usually they have 1 or 2 kids, because some kids already grown kids, there were schools, but now they have the old kid in a small room. From the morning to the end, at night, they have to take care, right? And then there's no help at all. And the burden is really serious. So we have to really rethink this one. But I would say there are many ways to handle. I will stop here. Thank you. I think it's your first. Maybe ETF also can provide many good also examples. So.
Yeah, Georgios, would you like to follow up now?
Yes, thank you. A few points, because I think the discussion is very interesting. It's always the issue of no time. So I'm trying to pick up some of the points that Clarissa and Sungsup made earlier on. To start with the pandemic, you heard the example of Philippines, for example, where for 2 years now it's actually the physical opening of schools. In Italy, we know, of course, the Italian example, which was the first one, the first schools that closed down, in Europe at least, but also around the world, was one of the first examples. And of course, the chaos that came up with that, because of course it was a new experience. And the first thing that came in that discussion was not really the infrastructure. It was more, how long is this situation going to last? Are people going to lose their jobs? Teachers, in this case. The kids, are they going to miss some important lessons? Because we didn't know how long it was going to go on. So, and there was this mental element that Clarissa spoke about. It was very important at the beginning. Then schools started improvise. The schools were before the states. They came in and they started themselves. The people at the front line, as Clarissa called them, they started finding solutions before the official authorities. They were trying to contact the parents, to contact the children. They were trying to find a way to calm down the situation, to say, okay, let's take it easy. Use the books you have at home, start reading those chapters. It was done like that. And the infrastructure came into discussion actually a bit later. Remember that at the beginning of the COVID pandemic, the discussion about the infrastructure was also about legal issues. Can we use it? Is it an issue of personal, let's say, data there, and so on? And sometimes we had to overcome that as well. So the discussion in the pandemic around how you can continue working in, let's say, in the most normal way, in a distance, it grew up over these 2 years, and I think there's still space for development there. The second point I wanted to say is about this notion of lost time, that during the pandemic, many of us feel that we lost years of our lives. And it's again something that we need to address, in the sense that time is never lost in a way. It's time that you can use in different ways, but there is a need for a response there, and because that creates also a pressure now for the post-pandemic period on how to respond and catch up that time that we lost. And you will see a lot of things coming up now with this logic that since we lost 2 years, let's do everything now. And I think that would be the wrong approach again. On the comment of Sungsup, I very much agree with that. I think he was responding to the question of Mahmoud about the infrastructure. And I think infrastructure is important, definitely. I think there's no disagreement on that. But there are many other things that they need to support the logic of the digital infrastructure. And it doesn't have to be the most expensive solution every time. Let's not forget that there is a whole economy around the logic of the digital infrastructure, which often benefits from this, from the market that is created. So I think, again, the schools came up first. They developed simple software, simple tools to communicate with the parents, with the students, to help them grow. It was not every day online at the beginning. It was a few hours a day, some days a week. Then the camera came in. We reached a couple of, I remember from my children that we had to go through a couple of months before they could do, for example, physical education in front of the camera. It was not the most obvious thing at the beginning. It was easier to give some lessons in maths, for example, and say, study about that. Yeah, and it was much easier then. So that's the other point I wanted to bring up. Then this idea of how do we help communities and how we help countries, that came in a few questions. Well, I think the first response from my side would be, we need to understand the challenges. I mean, the problem might be the same, but the challenges to solve that problem, they have a very sort of local element, and that's very important. Not all communities start from the same point. The ground is not prepared in the same way in different communities. So that is something we need to take into account. Often issues like autonomy and flexibility of the institutions, of the schools, of the local authorities, they help a lot to be able to be flexible. Flexibility is a key ability in this situation of the pandemic. So sometimes it's not about just helping to create an infrastructure, is to put all these elements that would support the infrastructure and would allow the institution to seek their own solutions as well. And empower them to do that, the communities to do that, to come out and find solutions. I hope I addressed some of the points raised before. Thank you.
Absolutely, Georgios. Thank you very much. So it's also about seeing things looking at things from the different perspectives that compared to the ones which we would immediately think of, such as the most expensive digital infrastructure. And I
Daria,
know that, yes.
One point, if I may. Sorry to jump back into it, but since this discussion is taking place within the logic of partnerships and networks, yes. maybe one idea to add is that during the pandemic, the need to work together with others, create partnerships, networks has increased. And again, this is something to be noted. It's a new modality of teaching, of learning, of doing business in general. So I think that's another element to put into discussion, that in a situation like that, you need to find partners, to learn from others, to discuss, to share your experience, to exchange ideas in practice, how you do that and all that. That's very helpful.
Thank you very much, Georgios. No, it's absolutely straight to the point, and we'll go to. We'll explore this part of our discussion just in a few seconds. I just know that Clarissa wants to follow up on this discussion we are having about the vulnerable groups and the different aspects which you can think of when dealing with the crisis. And one would be about narrowing the focus of curricula. Clarissa, maybe you would like to share something which could be helpful for all those who are following.
Sure. Thank you, Georgios and Sungsup. And just maybe tackling Khaled's question from a on the ground perspective. The only thing I'll add is effective opportunities that we've found as Teach for the Philippines that will continue to create learning societies with the communities that have bore the brunt of this pandemic, whether that's through unemployment. We don't have, at the moment, to my knowledge, refugees in the Philippines. So what we do have are fishermen and farmers and a whole bunch of rural communities that have been adversely affected by this pandemic because they don't make any income. With all of our lockdowns, they haven't been able to get their product to the cities. And so what we did in our rural areas is we really narrowed the curriculum to literacy and numeracy, which we were able to focus on with the young kids. But the Philippines could be contextual, Khaled, in the sense that the PISA results and the TIMSS have shown that even up to 15, we're not very strong at reading and numbers. And so this has been effective for us. We were also able to involve the parents in our lessons. Many of our parents don't read or write themselves. And so we're now teaching and creating mini learning societies in our villages and towns. And then the last thing I'll share is that one thing we've done since the beginning, but obviously came to bear even more in the last couple of years, is we have trauma-informed staff, right? And so the other effective opportunity that we have is to really acknowledge that this has been a traumatic experience, and then work together at the micro level that will hopefully balloon to the macro level, to both acknowledge and not just continue on as business as usual, but to acknowledge, address, and then rebuild together. So that's all I wanted to add from the ground perspective to Khaled's question.
Thank you very much, Clarissa. I think it was very helpful. And I'd like now to follow up to what Georgios just said. So bringing up the issue of partnerships as a way to respond to the pandemic. And I'm a bit reshuffling what we thought would be the organization of our conversation, because I'd like to thank Georgios for this inspiration and give the floor first to Sungsup, asking him what is the Asian Development Bank doing to support partnerships in helping learning society in Asia and the Pacific? Sungsup.
Yeah, this is very good question. Thanks very much. The learning society, building learning society is extremely important. We have it like 4 level of the partnership we are supporting. First, at the school level, we have to now change the school so that they can now educate students so that they can become a learner, lifelong learner, and that they learn what to learn, how to learn, how to learn, perhaps. So we need to redesign the school that way. And then second important is that encourage the partnership. The engagement also encourage engagement of the parents and community in school. So we are really working on that. The third one, also we also promoting, for example, the industry and school academic partnership, so that the student in the school, they go to industry and then learn. In Europe, and you have a well structured, old history on this, but in Asia, in some countries, we don't have it such. So we try to promote internship and exposure to the industry in partnership with those. And I think today we talk about internationalization. Also, this become very important. And then we encourage also the regional cooperation among the neighboring country, and also international cooperation, because nation can be learning nation. They have to learn something from the other. So we try to do that. We have to create, therefore, global learning society that way. And at the bank level, global learning, like ETF, can play very important role. Regional level, some also the one. And also the school level and also the national level we can think about. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sungsup. You flagged that there are some differences between Europe and Asia. Georgios, what about the countries which are neighboring the European Union? What role does the partnerships play for education developments in such regions?
Thank you, Daria. Yes, I think partnerships are, as I said, a fundamental way of doing business, I think, nowadays, and in education training especially, where there's this soft sort of competence, at the political level. Cooperating in education training, it's often very helpful. And from our experience working with countries in the EU neighborhood, we feel that there is a need for that. There is a need, first of all, to see what others are doing within the region, but also beyond the region. Because often when you're building a partnership, you're looking for a win-win situation, what you can get and what you can give. I think it's fundamental in a good partnership, that sort of dimension. So you're often looking for a partner that is more or less in the same situation as you are, or is addressing the problem in the same way, and you're trying to see, okay, how are they doing it there? Sometimes you're looking for justification. Sometimes you're saying, I'm doing that, and then, by the way, they're doing the same thing. Yeah, and is that sort of logic that also helps in policy making? It's important. So we see that a lot. The network that we have for the Centers of Excellence, for example, which is an international network that ETF has created, shows also with numbers that many good schools, good skills providers, though they've been producing good, solid education, training, or skills, they've been working in isolation. So, you can do that without having partnership. But then the question comes, okay, so what do the learners do after that? Where do they go? How do they become? So that's where you need the partnership element to come in. So we find that this is important, and by developing this network, we work with schools, with providers in different countries to identify their partners. It's up to them. Now, it's easy to talk about partnerships, but of course it's not so easy to do it in practice. That's especially in a pandemic situation where the proximity is always difficult. Sometimes there are language barriers, there are cultural barriers as well, which are important. But that's a benefit again from the partnerships. So you can provide, for example, interpretation in every meeting you have. But does it help to create this sort of idea that if you want to work with someone, then the language issue has to be addressed somehow? So it's an interesting discussion around partnerships and networks. I think there's a plethora now of networks all around education and training. Maybe too much, one could argue, or too many. I think it's not a matter of needing more. I think it's a matter of using them in the best possible way, making sure that they are sustainable. It's easy to build a network or a partnership, but then how do you sustain it in different sort of contexts? That's always difficult. So ETF, we're working a lot on that. And beyond, of course, the one I mentioned on the network we have on Centers of Excellence, we have created recently, we launched a community of innovators, for example. It's an exciting sort of group there of people on the ground who are at the front line, like Clarissa, and they share with us the innovative solutions they found to promote teaching and learning. That's very interesting. We're working in networks in areas like qualifications, quality assurance, for example. There's a long-standing network there that we're discussing with different countries how they quality assure their system and so on. So yes, many examples from the work we do with partner countries.
Thank you very much, Georgios. And I'm kindly asking our colleague Matteo, who is helping out on the technical side, to share in the chat two resources which might be helpful for all those who are following. The first one is an article, a web article, which is listing the networks which Georgios just flagged, so that you can know more and also see how you can get involved. And the second one is a reflection on how to build successful partnerships. Indeed, Georgios, you have flagged some of the elements. This month in this campaign, we've also launched a number of polls, one of which was a provocative one with questions: how long should a partnership last, be it 1 month, 1 year, 10 years, or forever? These are obviously questions with no right answer, but it is precisely for shaping the discussion on and narrow down what do we mean by partnerships and how we can also help learn to have partnerships which are meaningful and goal-oriented and effective for everyone. Now I'd like to go back to the micro-local level, like Clarissa has defined the activities and the context in which she's been operating, and mostly so in the last years of also isolation due to the pandemic. What is the role of partnerships at the local level, and in particular in addressing the challenges of learning in schools? Clarissa.
Thank you, Daria. And I'll always speak from the perspective of a teacher and administrator, again at the front lines. And teachers clearly, to Georgios and Sungsup's points, can't do it alone. And I think I have not much more to add, because I think Sungsup and Georgios have spoken about teachers need the country level support, obviously, to see their work through, to make sure policies are aligned with what's actually happening at the ground. So what I'm going to do, Daria, is slightly reorient your question and maybe put out there that we don't forget that parents and students are partners too. And that when we orient ourselves and look at them in that way, then they are every bit as much an important player in our learning society. And having these local networks and local partnerships at our community level are going to be equally as important at building our learning societies from the bottom up as well as from the top down, and to ultimately remember that education is a long game and change takes time. And the sooner that we see that the children we're teaching now are taking the baton from us in this relay race over generations to actual change, the stronger and perhaps faster we will get to where we're trying to go. So that's just what I'll contribute, Daria.
Thank you very much, Clarissa, for reminding us how change can take place, not only from the top down, but also, and maybe even more from the bottom up. We're approaching the end of the conversation, which has been very valuable and very inspirational. And I'd like to ask to each of you one same question. If you had to summarize in a short statement, how do we empower learning societies in an age of disruption? What is the advice, the one and only advice that you would give? It's hard to be selective, but I think it's very interesting to sum it up this way. Who'd like to take the floor first and break the ice? Georgios.
So the question is, what would be that one word that we would put at the front in building knowledge societies or learning societies, right?
A word with a short explanation, if you want.
Yeah, I think it would be learning. So you need learning in order to build a learning society. That's what I'm saying. And learning, of course, is linked with this idea of being mutual, of partnerships, of knowledge. You need knowledge to do that. You need good intentions. That would be part of it. I think we need to see what others are doing. So I think learning is the fundamental sort of element for a learning society, and then of course this needs to be glued with many other things. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Georgios. So Georgios' word is learning. What would be yours, Sungsup?
Yeah, now when I think about coming world, we will see the disruption. That like the COVID-19. To survive here, we have to make it ourselves, us, the learning person, individual, and then we have to change our organization, learning organization. We have to make it also nation as a learning organization, and global world. We have to make it learning organization to deal with this mega disruption. Without it, it's very difficult we can sustain our, I think, the civilization, and also micro level we cannot survive. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sungsup. So we have learning and disruption. Clarissa, what's yours?
I'm going to go with inclusion and inclusive, and just saying that we need a whole society approach, and to continue to be inclusive of the voices of the folks at the front lines, the teachers, the students, and their parents, because that diversity adds to both the learning that we have as an international community, but also to the disruption and the future of our shared world.
Thank you very much. So the three words which were flagged by the distinguished speakers of today's on as regards how to empower learning societies in these difficult times which we are all living are learning, disruption, and inclusion. So I'd like to thank the three distinguished speakers who have participated today in our Learning Connects conversation about addressing the learning crisis. Can partnerships help? So thanks a lot to Clarissa Delgado, co-founder and CEO of Teach for the Philippines. Thank you, Clarissa.
Thank you so much, Daria. It's wonderful to be here.
Thanks a lot to Sungsup Ra, Director of the South Asia Human and Social Development Division and Chair of the Education Sector Group at the Asian Development Bank. Thank you, Sungsup.
Thank you very much, Daria. Also, colleagues here. It's a pleasure to be here. This is very wonderful event.
Thank you so much. And thanks a lot to Georgios Zisimos, Head of Policy Advice and EU Programming Unit at the European Training Foundation.
Thank you, Daria. Thank you, Clarissa. Thank you, Sungsup Ra. Thank you to the people who've been watching us and stayed with us. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
And thanks a lot to the Asian Development Bank overall for having co-hosted this event, and congratulations on the newly launched book, Powering a Learning Society During an Age of Disruption. We shared a link in the chat so you can have access to all of that. Like Georgios just said, thanks a lot to all of you who have been watching us online, sharing questions and comments. It's great to be part of the same community. Keep on following the ETF on all social media accounts. Join our open space community and come to our next Learning Connects conversation, which will happen next Wednesday and will be about virtuous finance for the future of education. Thanks a lot, everyone. I wish you a lovely day and a lovely evening wherever you are. Bye, and thanks a lot.